Nice to see you on this Sunday. Very happy to be back, given how busy it is politically already in this country. And the Liberal caucus is set to meet tomorrow in British Columbia. And the government finds itself, of course, in this delicate political position after losing the formal support of the NDP. And the Conservatives now saying they will call a confidence vote as soon as they can. Those two things could force an early election. But with all of that on the table, Liberal House Leader Karina Gould says her party is ready to take on any fight that comes their way. Liberal House Leader Karina Gould, thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Last week when you were at the cabinet retreat, you were pretty confident that this deal was going to hold until the end of June. You called it a good and strong agreement. Were you actually caught that off guard by the news this week?
Yeah, I was.
What does that tell you then about how strong the deal actually was, or how forthcoming the NDP was being with you?
Well, I mean, they weren't being forthcoming, which I think is very clear. But I do think it was a good and strong agreement. I mean, it gave Canada 3 years of a stable government, delivered some major policies and programs. So that was positive for Canadians. But what it says to me is that, the NDP is willing to put at risk those policies and those programs because they think it'll help them politically. So, at the end of the day, the supply and confidence agreement, while not unique in Canada, was fairly unique at the federal level.
Yep.
And now we're going back to, minority parliament as per usual.
Sure, but you're not suggesting here that you're going to stop, that you're going to prevent pharmacare from passing Parliament, that you're not actually going to implement those things, that long-term care, you're abandoning those things, that you're still committed to those ideas.
We are still committed to them. We're still committed to moving forward with the policy agenda that we ran on in 2021. And to be frank, I mean, a lot of what was in the supply and confidence agreement was what was in the Liberal platform with a couple of other additions. But at the same time, what the NDP are putting forward is that, they're not clear if they want to continue working with us. And if we do go to an election, the risk is that, there's a possibility the Conservatives could get elected. And we know very clearly that Mr. Poilievre doesn't support the initiatives that we have put forward. For some reason, he doesn't think seniors should have access to free dental care, and he doesn't think kids across this country should have access to either school meals or childcare. Yeah. So,
But if Mr. Poilievre gets elected, it is not Jagmeet Singh's fault. It will be because your government will not have been able to convince Canadians that those programs are important.
Well, I would say that the supply and confidence agreement, there was always an opportunity to walk away from either side, right? Sure. Mr. Singh's decision to walk away now is an interesting choice because there's still, almost a year left to make sure that those programs are implemented well across the country. And that's one more year of time that allows provinces to, ensure those programs are there. And it just makes it harder for a potential Poilievre government to undo them. So for me, it is a question mark as to why Mr. Singh decided to do it now. And the only reason I can come up with is because he thinks it's politically advantageous for him.
Well, I mean, and you could see why he might think that. Your party is not doing well in the polls and presumably dragging his party down as well. So, I mean, you're a politician as well as a minister. You understand why he would want to distinguish himself from you, do you not?
Yeah, look, I mean, I know we've been in government for 9 years, and I know that's a long time in Canada. So I understand that. I do think, though, however, that as we are, marching towards what is a potential election, whether that's, in 6 weeks, 6 months, or a year from now, the question is really going to have to turn as well to what Mr. Poilievre is putting forward to Canadians. At this point, I mean, he's doing a good job criticizing, but apart from cutting programs that Canadians care about, we don't know a whole lot else.
How do you plan then to work with the NDP going forward? Because yes, you don't have a deal anymore, but they've also made it very clear that they're going to look at votes on a case-by-case basis. So I would imagine that you still have to have pretty open communication with either them, the Bloc, or the Conservatives in order to make sure you don't end up in an election.
Yeah, and look, I mean, even when we had the supply and confidence agreement with the NDP, I always maintained open communication with the other House leaders.
Right.
You know, we actually like work well together. We disagree, you know, on some pretty fundamental things, but when it comes to being able to talk to each other, even when we disagree, we're always able to do that. So, you know, I'll continue in that vein moving forward. And you know, there's certainly going to be areas of common interest with the NDP. There'll be some with the Bloc. Maybe even with the Conservatives, although less likely. And I'll just make sure that, you know, my focus and our government's focus is squarely on continuing to deliver for Canadians.
The Conservatives, as I'm sure you know, have said that they plan to put forward a confidence motion as soon as they can. How, as a House leader, do you navigate that? Because obviously that will mean that if you want to stay in government, you're going to have to find support. What do you envision there?
Well, look, that's the Conservatives' prerogative if that's what they want. And then, you know, it'll also be up to the other opposition parties, you know, to determine if they still have confidence in the government or if they want to go to an election. You know, that's just the nature of minority parliaments. I mean, and that's, you know, what we're going to have to face on a case-by-case, vote-by-vote basis. But, you know, we're going to face those, you know, calmly and, you know, responding as necessary. And, you know, just, you know, having you know, the you know, open approach that I've always maintained as House leader. So we'll see. I don't know exactly when the Conservatives are going to do that. That will be up to them. And then I don't know how the NDP or the Bloc are going to respond, but certainly I will be having many conversations with all of the House leaders over the coming days, weeks, and months.
As you know, Jagmeet Singh is pointing to not getting enough movement on grocery prices, rental costs, those are the kinds of issues he's pointing to as a reason to leave the deal. Do you, without getting into private conversations, but were there conversations around those issues where you were not able to deliver anymore, where there were requests and you had to deny them, or you said, listen, this is all we can do? Like, were those actual sticking points in terms of your negotiations?
Well, look, I mean, I think this is much more about the NDP's political chances than it is about the actual relationship between the NDP and the Liberals in the House of Commons. I mean, we were able to work, you know, very effectively together on points of common interest. Of course, there were differences, and, you know, there were times when the NDP voted against us or made it very clear that they didn't support the direction we were going in. So I think this is a bit more of like his justification and his bravado, as opposed to, you know, something that is like real and tangible. Because if you want to look at housing, I mean, we've put forward the most ambitious housing strategy in Canadian history right now and made some really important moves on rental, on grocery. And, you know, incorporated, in fact, some of Mr. Singh's private members' bill into, you know, the Competition Act that we were working with. So, you know, again, this is about him. This is about his own political future. This is about his leadership, I think, of the NDP. It's about the NDP prospects. It's less about the actual relationship between the Liberals and the NDP, because I think we both recognize that we would be able to move forward on some things, but not on everything.
I mean, I take your point. It's about him, but it's also about your party not being successful and him not wanting to be tied to that, to go back to my earlier point. But let me move on to the caucus retreat that's coming up in British Columbia. You've got two by-elections coming up this month, the one in Montreal that is yours, that was your seat. And as you know, there are people in your caucus, I'm sure friends of yours, who had been hoping for more change over the summer, whether it be a cabinet shuffle, staffing moves, something. And nothing happened. Nothing happened, except you lost Jeremy Broadhurst, who was supposed to run the campaign. What are you going to say to your colleagues at caucus meeting on Monday when they are confused as to why there was not a bigger shift from cabinet and from the Prime Minister's office?
Well, I don't talk about what I talk about in caucus outside of caucus.
Well, I'm not asking you what you said. I'm asking you what you're going to say when you're confronted with those
but even
questions.
then, I mean, we do have caucus.
Fine. Then
right?
what would you say to that? What would you say to that? Don't forget that you're saying it in caucus. What would you say to that?
Well, look, same thing that I said at the cabinet retreat. I think, as I said earlier in this interview, we've been around for 9 years. So I get that, Canadians, see that and see that we've been here for a while. I would argue that I think we've done a good job in government, and I think we've delivered important programs that have had meaningful changes and impacts on the lives of Canadians. But I think it's natural, after 9 years for people to kick the tires and see what else is on offer, and to see, maybe if there's someone else who's offering something that they think is better. Where I think the challenge is here is that Mr. Poilievre doesn't actually want to share his vision because it's unlikely that it's something that resonates with a lot of Canadians. So it's better for him to criticize us and stay away from his plan and his vision, because it's going to be a lot of cuts and it's going to be taking away a lot of things that Canadians care about.
Karina Gould, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Rosie.
We're focused on delivering for Canadians. A big announcement on school foods. We got more work to do in creating $10 a day childcare spaces across the country, moving forward on insulin, pharmacare. These are things that matter for Canadians. We're going to stay focused on those. Hopefully the NDP will continue to try and deliver for Canadians. Right now they're focused on politics. We're focused on Canadians.
The Prime Minister there saying his focus, in case you hadn't heard, 16 times, delivering for Canadians. It's already been a roller coaster this past week in Canadian politics. We saw the departure of a top Liberal campaign official, caucus retreat for the Liberals about to begin, as we said. Can Justin Trudeau sell his MPs on the Liberals' path forward? Let's bring everybody back. Our Sunday Scrum, Tana McCharles, the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, Sherelle Evelyn, the Managing Editor of the Hill Times in Ottawa as well, and Jason Markusoff, producer and writer for CBC News, and he's in Calgary. Okay. I don't think that there are people who are going to say Justin Trudeau should quit, or a great number of them. But I don't know, Sherelle, that I would want to walk into that door tomorrow and not be able to point to anything that I had done to respond to that by-election loss at the beginning of the summer. How difficult do you think that meeting might be for the Prime Minister?
Oh, I think it could be pretty difficult. I mean, like you said, we haven't seen a big rollout. We haven't seen a shift. We haven't seen any real messaging to say, hey, I understand that people are feeling really uneasy about what's been going on, and this is our path forward.
Yeah.
And now you have the NDP deal is done. The campaign director is gone. We could be on the cusp of election. If they don't have a plan to present to MPs, which I don't know if they will, that's going to be really difficult. I mean, I think over the summer, we saw a little bit of the Prime Minister maybe trying to divide and conquer a bit with some of that discontent within the party, within the caucus, going to various regional caucus meetings and that sort of thing. But I think people are still feeling like they haven't been heard. They haven't had a chance to be heard. And with all of this kind of stuff that's rolling downhill now, it's going to be really difficult for him to say, hey, this is why we should believe in me.
Yeah, and when you have Jeremy Broadhurst was the chair of the campaign, the national campaign, leaving, I guess he's not leaving right away at the end of the month, and then the possibility at least of an election, that it's more real, Jason, it just seems like that would create a lot of nervous Nellies inside caucus, and that they would want to hear something, anything, that shows that there is, as Sherelle says, a plan.
In Tana's paper, The Star, there was some of the caucus reaction to to Jeremy Broadhurst leaving was, oh, this is some change. This is some level of change. We were asking for some change. This is good. This is a good reminder that what change means and what demands are going to be in caucus are different from the public. The public, probably most people have never heard of Jeremy Broadhurst. Probably even a lot of people watching the show, and political junkies might not have heard of Jeremy Broadhurst. But for people in caucus, they sort of want, they watch the deck chairs, they watch the seating arrangements, and they're going to have more internal demands, more focused demands. We'll see if there's, if this is a sort of a trophy, sort of a token move that Trudeau can promise them, but they are nervous. They've been nervous since the loss in Toronto St. Paul. They will be increasingly nervous if they lose La Salle-Verdun next week, which they won in 2021. I just checked again by 20 points. So they're going to be people nervous, but the the Liberal brain trust, Trudeau's brain trust, must be somewhat relieved that what seemed to be like a wave with Wayne Long starting to announce that he's like Trudeau to leave, and other people murmuring around in June, never materialized. It never grew. It wasn't a snowball rolling downhill. That's still the one MP who's not running again, who wants some guns. So we'll see how many people are emboldened to say anything more firmly.
Well, and as you said in the last hour too, if there's instability, hard to kick your leader to the curb, given that instability. Though, the U.S. did it, and they seem to be doing just fine. So who knows? There's maybe a lesson there for the Liberals as well. Tondo, what do you think that meeting's going to be like? Because the MPs feel like they don't have anything to say at the doors, is what I understand, and like things are a little bit directionless. So they want some reassurance because their jobs are on the line.
I mean, sure, and it's a tough thing to show change when to the rest of us watching from the outside, there's not a lot that has changed except for, at this point, that position at the director's position at the party. Look, there were 4, at the outset of the summer after Toronto St. Paul's erupted, there were 4 things that people thought that the Liberals could do to deliver or show change. What would that be? A change at the top at the PM? Well, that's not happening. A change at the senior ranks in the PMO? So far, that's not happened. A change at the party? Well, there's one thing. But the party is not still at a level of readiness, I would argue, with only 105 candidates nominated so far. I mean, maybe the NDP is at a worse state. They've only got 50. But the other thing is policy. So I think at this cabinet retreat, or rather caucus retreat, some of the MPs may be looking for changes in direction on big things like carbon pricing or Middle East policy or the economic direction. Will the Trudeau Liberals now pull a little bit more to the centre, being freed from the NDP deal? I'm not sure you'll see that. I do think you'll see perhaps not as vocal MPs coming out publicly like Wayne Long has. I think there will be some messages carried forward, MPs saying, my constituents want the Prime Minister to leave. But what I understand is that at least the party, or rather the Prime Minister's office, thinks that most of the MPs are at this point behind the Prime Minister, leading them into the next election. Could that change in the next year? Absolutely it could. But, there are things going to be happening there to keep them interested and, kind of curious with, Mark Carney showing up of all people. Yeah, because he's the only Canadian who can talk about productivity. kind of interesting that he got tapped. Yeah. I will say one of the things that Chantal Hébert said on At Issue last week that I thought was very smart, she says many smart things, as you all know, is that people maybe make a change between calling for the Prime Minister's resignation and then just deciding themselves to leave. Andy Fillmore, we had widely expected it, but he's left his seat to go run to be the mayor of Halifax. There's all those rumors around Pablo Rodriguez. And I wonder, Sherelle, whether that starts to create some momentum for something else, because people just say, well, I'm not gonna win. I better go find another job that I can do, and I'm gonna do it sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and I wonder if, all the recent developments with, Jeremy Broadhurst leaving and the NDP deal being done, that's kind of going to really firm up for some people about whether or not they kind of have to put up or shut up. Yeah. If they're going to be, say, okay, clearly this is the path forward. We could be in an election situation at any moment. So that means likely that, despite all the rhetoric and calls, like Trudeau isn't going anywhere, like he said, he really means it. So if we don't want to get stuck in, looking for a job after potentially losing a seat, this is the time to hear what the party's plan is. And if they don't hear something that they really like and think that's viable, then that's going to say this would be the time to say, all right, I'm out the door. Because if you don't have things like, I'm sure there's still things like cabinet shuffles being dangled, people hoping for a promotion for those last few months. But outside of that, there isn't really a lot to keep people in if they don't see a path forward.
Jason, what do you think of that? And also what Tonda said there, that being free from the NDP could allow some space for the Liberals to maybe go somewhere in a policy direction that they hadn't thought of doing.
And that's a quite interesting facet. I'm glad Tonda brought it up, because while you have the NDP talking about corporate greed now much more, who are the Liberals bringing into caucus? Mark Carney, who is the chair of Brookfield Asset Management, one of the largest corporations in the country. So there, and a lot of people will argue that Poilievre has taken his party further to the conservative right. So is there this opportunity to reclaim the center? But that comes challenging because the center seems to be like the status quo. And if this is a change election, if both Jagmeet Singh and Pierre Poilievre are really jostling for change, and the Liberals aren't able to offer that, what proposition is there for Canadians? And we're, from everything people have been hearing in some of the by-election writings, there's real appetite for change, real appetite for a move from the status quo, and what can the Liberals offer? And again, as Tonda said, what can the Liberal MPs and candidates offer at the doors that are going to appeal to those people?
Tonda, if the Liberals, and I know we'll probably talk about it next week too, but if the Liberals were to lose Lassalle-Marfordun in Montreal, would you expect the same sort of outcry that we saw around the Toronto loss? Because if you can't keep those seats, what are your hopes of forming government again?
I mean, I think it does set up another challenge for the Prime Minister, but look, Lassalle-Marfordun is a test for Trudeau. The Winnipeg riding's a test for Singh. Yeah. We'll have all kinds of storylines if either of those goes to the rival party. But I think that it also, if those ridings stay the same, then we're still, the storylines don't change. I think the Quebec riding as a loss for Trudeau is less impactful than the Toronto seat loss. And maybe you'd expect me to say that, but look, that is the bedrock of Liberal support in Toronto. It has been impenetrable. Lassalle-Marfordun, half of the riding used to be Paul Martin's, yes. But the NDP have a terrific local candidate and a city councillor. There's a whole bunch of other dynamics. The Bloc could come up the middle. So I'm not prepared to sort of call that and what it represents just now.
Okay, fair enough. We'll make you call it when it's over, and you can speculate then. Thank you all so much for coming in on a Sunday and being with us. We really appreciate it, and it's so nice to see you all again.